Y'all, how's everyone doing? I'm from the South in the US, if you couldn't just tell from the y'all. It's nice to be here. It's definitely, I know a lot of people have talked about how nice it is to have a community to talk about product marketing. I've been in the space for about 12 years, and this is the first time I've ever felt like there's a group of people who I could talk to. There's always little niches at conferences or one talk or one panel, but it's great to be here all together. So it's okay if it's not working.
Yeah, those are good.
That's okay. Okay, cool. No worries. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you today about how to build and scale a product marketing team. And this is based on my experience at several different companies. I started out at GE, which is a very heavy B2B sales enablement space. Etsy, where I worked on mostly small businesses, so selling to Etsy sellers or marketing to Etsy sellers, as well as at MailChimp was very much SMB focused. And I just joined a company called Diligent, which builds board governance software, so much more focused on the enterprise space, but we're also looking at local governments and NGOs and other organizations that need governance software. So a good experience across B2B, B2C, and small versus large businesses. So, today, what I hope you all will take away from this is whether you are the first product marketer at your organization or you're coming in to start a team or you're running your first team, what are some tips you can use and some real tangible tactics to really build the presence of product marketing in your organization? So that's what this is focused on today. And I thought I'd start out with my product philosophy. So these are the things that I think about after all the time that I've spent. What are the things that feel really true to me in terms of how product marketing should be working at an organization and the things that need to be true in order to have a great product? The number one thing is that you can't build a great brand without a great product. So your really core great product is what enables a really strong brand. Commitment to your truest fans is what drives word of mouth, and that is so important, especially in the SMB space. So knowing who your early adopters are and really building for them and listening to them. We've heard a lot about listening to your customers, so that is super important in order to really drive adoption and go beyond your early adopter community. The entire customer experience matters, and this is something that I think can be really easy to forget about when we're focused on the day-to-day launching a new product. This means, from your really high funnel awareness work or your thought leadership pieces through your marketing content through to your website, it all matters and it all is impacting your brand and your product, both your awareness, all the attributes that customers will attribute to your business and your product. Fourth, companies need crystallized differentiation points. I'm not going to dwell on this because we've heard a lot about it, but you do need to understand how you're differentiated from your competition. It doesn't mean that every single feature or product that you launch has to be hyper differentiated, but as a whole, your product should be differentiated. And then finally, retention is critical from day one. So this is something, working in the SMB space, there's a lot of churn because small businesses go out of business quite rapidly. It's just kind of part of the market. So how do you retain those businesses that are going to stay in business, that are going to grow, and that are going to scale with your platform? So I was looking for an image that said, what is it like to be a product marketer? And I thought this was a really good one because you've got everyone's coming to you. They all want different things. You've got sales, you've got marketing, you've got your content teams, you got your product teams, engineers, designers, and you're just trying to stay in the middle and stay sane and trying to get everyone to let me just do my job and let me just do what I know is most important. So I think this is a really good example. This is often how I feel. And hopefully some of the tactics that I give you will give you some tangible things to say, this isn't a priority today. Prioritization is obviously number one when you're working in a hyper cross-functional role like ours. So the eight steps, these are kind of the 4 buckets. And again, this will all get sent out. So no need to take notes unless if you want to, which is fine. The first is understanding your customers. So we'll talk through how to do that. The second is knowing your market, really understanding the market that you're playing in, building strong relationships internally, and then creating your vision. So we'll talk through each of these 4 areas, and that's where we'll get the different 8 steps from. So the first piece is really understanding your customers, and there's 3 different areas in this that I'll talk through. The first one is around defining your target audience. So this is something that can happen either qualitatively or quantitatively. I put up some examples. I'm sure you'll have different examples inside of your organization. But when I come into a new place, and I just started a new role at Diligent, which I'm super excited about, but the number one thing is, how do I understand the customers? And so the first things that I'm going to think about are probably on the qualitative side here, doing customer interviews or tagging along with the sales team, speaking to internal stakeholders whose job is also to understand the customer, and potentially tagging along with the UX research team if they're doing any sort of research. Those are really good ways to me to really start to build a more colorful understanding of your customers, but you also want to understand them quantitatively. So you also want to dig into the business, the numbers. If you're a global business like we are, what are the different markets where you're gaining a lot of traction? What are your retention rates across those markets? If you have multiple product lines, what are the different product lines that are getting a lot of traction? And I put in here, segmentation is another way to understand your customers. How many of y'all have done a formal segmentation study? Anyone? I'm sorry, I apologize. I forgot to translate these numbers, but they're in the hundreds of thousands of dollars or pounds. So they're not cheap. Which is why, if you're a scrappy startup, you don't necessarily get to spend 200 pounds on a segmentation study. It's great if you do. I think it's probably the easiest way, even though it's a lot of work, it's the easiest way to get a really good understanding of your customers that's both qualitative and quantitative. You can also look at things like support volume. So if you have a customer support team, sitting down with them and looking at the different data points that they pull in and understanding what big customer questions they're answering. If one of the things I like to do is when we launch a new feature, whoever's working on that from a product marketing perspective, have them track support volume alongside the support team and understand what questions are coming up and feed that back into the product team. MailChimp had a really good organization where we actually had customer service or customer support embedded in the launch team. So they were kind of sharing that feedback as we went on and really talking about, do we need to put these features on the roadmap, or do we need these product improvements? Is there a UX issue that we're facing? So then what are the outputs that you're going to get from doing this research? And I think these are things that can be socialized around the entire organization. It's customer segments. Always want to have marketing personas, understanding the top concerns of your customers and the problems that they need to be solving or that they're trying to solve, which I think feeds into the value prop conversation that we just heard. And then empathy workshops are something that I love to do. There's a lot of companies that do it. I think the way that I like to think about them is you just get a lot of the stakeholders in the room and you help them understand who the customer is through whatever tools you have. And I put up here, this is an example of one that I ran with a product designer at Etsy. And we built out a pamphlet that was about 10 pages long, and it had quantitative data from our research, from our market research. It also had qualitative feedback from customer interviews. And we basically had our PR team, our marketing team, product design, support, a bunch of different functions in the room, and we'd go through this workbook together, and we kind of use Post-it notes to talk about how understanding the customer was going to change what marketing we were going to put into market or how we were going to think about the product design. And so you basically are creating a shared dialogue with your cross-functional team. And it can often feel like this, oh my God, I totally understand who we're targeting, and everyone can go off and build something that's a really great experience. And this is actually a pro tip. If you guys use GIFs, I don't know whether any of your organizations are GIF heavy, but MailChimp has a really good Giphy page with a lot of these GIFs, and they put a lot of time and effort into them. So it's a fun place to look. The second step in knowing your customers is articulating the words to use. And so, one of the big inputs here could be a full-scale messaging study, which again is going to run you in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you have the bandwidth to do it in terms of someone who can run the study as well as the budget, you get a lot of mileage out of this. You can also do it in-house, though. There's a lot of ways with all the tools that are out there today to kind of understand what messages are resonating with your audience. I like to feed it into UX research. So if we're doing UX research iteration on a product that we're in the process of building, asking the UX researcher to add in, a handful of the marketing messages and test which one works the best, or give you feedback on that. I think that's a really easy way to get some some more understanding of which words will really resonate. And then your output, of course, you're going to get your messaging architecture, your value proposition, proof points, which we heard about a lot today. I think those are, again, it's hard. They don't always, the data doesn't always support what you want it, or doesn't always say what you want it to say, but when it does, it's super important to use it, because that also is another differentiator. If you can have strong proof points with numbers, it's something that's really hard to ignore when you're comparing products. And then finally, a list of your prioritized features as well as messages. And this is something, so real quick, we did a messaging study at MailChimp, and we basically, out of that, got back a report that said, we had 3 different segments that we were going after, and it said for these 3 different segments, not only for the products that we'd already built, but we also put in there things that we were thinking about building on the roadmap. And we got a list that came back and said, for the 3 different segments, these are the different products and features that are most important to them, or that they would be most interested in seeing in the future. So it can also start to drive the product roadmap. And it really helped us have a much more quantitative conversation about what the product team should build based on marketing feedback or market feedback. And so this is another kind of just diagram of how you can build messaging architecture, but there's a lot of different components that go into it. So it's your segmentation, it's your value proposition, it's the research that you've done, and you basically build yourself an architecture that content team, copywriters, or even product marketers can use to build out all the messaging that's needed for a given launch or for a given campaign. And then third, this is where I think it really depends on who your audience is, but identifying the most impactful channels, so all the way from awareness through to retention. Which marketing channels are performing best for your business? If you're at an organization that has, let's say, more than 200 or 300 employees, you're probably having to talk to multiple people within the organization to get this data. Do you have an email marketing team? Do you have a PR team? Do you have a sales team? They're all going to have their own perspective, and you want to take that into account. But you really want to know, where's your customer base hanging out, and how do you reach them? How do you have conversations with them? This is important, I think, especially if you're trying to reposition yourself in the market, because your existing customers are probably going to be looking to you for the type of content they've always looked to you for. So you might have to go a little bit higher up in the funnel and start to understand what industry publications are they looking at, because that becomes really important. If you want to tell them, we're not just this type of business, we're also building a new type of product in this way. So then we'll move on to the second bucket, which is knowing your market. And this is really around competitive intelligence. So we just talked a lot about the customer, which obviously is going to give you a really good basic understanding of the market landscape. I think it depends on who you're getting that information from. I haven't always had access to a sales team. So at Etsy and MailChimp, we did not have a sales team. And without a sales team, it's often hard to get that competitive intel internally. So you have to do your own digging. But it is really about architecting the competitive landscape. And I think this is one of those things that if you can do it super well, you're going to be able to build a lot of clout in the organization, because this is something that's very time consuming. It's hard to get visibility into, but it's important for every single function. And especially if you're in a product-led organization, it's important for the engineers, for the designers, for the product managers. They all need to understand this, but there aren't many engineers who are going to take 3 hours of their week and really figure out how the competitive landscape is evolving. So yeah, I think in terms of architecting the competitive landscape, it's about meeting with those internal stakeholders, whoever they are within your organization. That's obviously the first starting point. Maybe you've already done that in your effort to understand your customers. There's a lot of great information on the review sites, so G2 Crowd, Capterra, any of the other ones, but basically getting your hands on customer reviews. If you have I don't know whether folks have if there are other ones here that are really important in Europe, but basically those sites where customers are going in and leaving anonymous feedback, and kind of have to take it a little bit with a grain of salt, because it's kind of like Yelp, where you get people who love it and the people who hate it, but it does give you some interesting data points. Also looking into your competitors and what is going on in their business. So are they making any acquisitions? I love Crunchbase. If any of y'all have the login that allows you to get a lot more detailed information. If you don't have it, it's maybe worth talking to your partnership team or your sales team about potentially partnering to buy that, because you get a lot of in-depth information about the companies that you're looking at. And then finally, it's not something that just happens once and then is done. So understanding the competitive landscape is something that will evolve and it'll change. And I think I've been lucky to work in industries that have been changing really rapidly, and there's been a lot of new entrants. So I think if you're in that type of space, then it's even more important to stay on top of it. Out of curiosity, how many of y'all work at an organization that has a market research function that is owning this separate from the PMM team? Yeah. So yeah, maybe 20% or something. So this is often something that once you get to a certain point, it becomes important enough for that to be spun off into its own team, but it can often live in the PMM function. And what I find is early on, if you can do this really well as a team, it, like I said earlier, builds a lot of clout and builds a lot of trust and kind of interest in your work across the organization. And then I put this is one example of how if I'm sitting down with someone who doesn't want to go super in depth into all the different competitive stuff, I might do this like a red, green, yellow for different features that we know are important. This is a great slide to use with your product team or your engineers, just to kind of give them an overview of where you sit in the market and who's building what. It takes probably, 5 hours to build something like this if you're starting from scratch doing the research, but it's not earth-shattering, at least to get a cursory look at this. So this is, I think, a really good way to give people a snapshot. So that's another thing I would say about the competitive landscape is if you can provide a quick and easy way for people to digest this, that's not a 10-page report, that's going to get you a lot further. You're going to still want to have that in-depth information for a lot of other internal conversations. But when you're talking about socializing across the organization, I think something like that works well. This is another one that I like to use, which is for your main competitors, where are they today? And then where could they be in the future real soon? And so at MailChimp, I mentioned we were in a super hot, very fast moving market, and it shifted kind of every week or every month. And so we had to always kind of know this is where we're going, but where could this competitor go? And that actually really influenced what tiers of competition we put different competitors in. And then obviously there's this one, but I don't think that this tells you as much as the other two. So, you might want to start with here's the matrix. I think everyone's used to seeing the grid of these are the different competitors, but I think the other two give you a little bit more clarity and create a better dialogue about what the competitive landscape looks like. And then the third bucket is building strong relationships. This is really about internal relationships when you're talking about scaling product marketing. I think that product marketers always do best if they are embedded in product development. It's not always possible, and you might have an organization like at Babbel, we just heard about, they kind of split theirs where one group is focused more on the product side and one is focused more on marketing. MailChimp was kind of shifting to that as well, because it's not realistic to have every PMM hyper aligned as you're growing to a product team. But I do think that you've got really strong, it's really important to have these relationships, especially if you're going to be working on new feature releases, because it allows you to start to influence the product roadmap. The PM to me is the most important, and think of them as kind of your partner in crime, your thought partner. You're really thinking about how do you define the opportunity? Do you have a shared understanding? And I think it's really healthy to have tension there and to be pushing and pulling around who you're going after, why you're going after them, whether this feature is important. The designer is also super important. So a product designer, they, in the best case scenario, have been a really, really strong counterpart and advocate for the product marketing vision. And we heard earlier about using the product designer to kind of create the marketing content. I think when that happens, when product designers feel like they own the marketing content, I've seen them get super involved in research and in kind of helping you with marketing content. And I think that just creates a really great dialogue across the organization and across within the cross-functional team. Engineers, I had a really great project I worked on where we did a big workshop, an ideation workshop for a new product that I was working on at Etsy. And the engineer in the room came up with this amazing idea that no one else would have come up with, but he almost didn't come and we almost didn't invite him to this workshop. So I think, it's not always the people who you would think about bringing into the room when you're talking about these different conversations, but when you're building products and when you're trying to innovate in a space that feels really competitive, bringing in those different perspectives can also or often help set you apart. And then finally, research, I mentioned earlier, but I think having a close relationship with your researcher allows you to research marketing, which isn't something we often think about, especially if it's a UX researcher or a product researcher. They might not even think about it. But if you just say, can I just get 5 minutes or 10 minutes at the beginning or end of your research, they often will throw it in, and it creates more of a more interesting conversation with the customer as well. I like to use it as the intro because I think it can start a really nice conversation. So, making sure that you're embedded in the product development team, you have relationships with these different people, and you're thinking about what net new you are bringing to them. So it's not just about them giving you something, but you are bringing something new to them. And I think what we just talked through with customer insights and competitive landscape is often a great starting point. And what this creates at the end of the day is a shared vision for the go-to-market strategy. Last thing you want is to have the product team thinking that they're building something and you're going to position it in one way, and then the marketing comes out and they don't understand why. So I think having that shared vision is super important. And then how do you build this relationship? I think this is another step, is bringing data back to your team, data or information. And so that data can be, it can be the market landscape. It can also be the marketing KPIs. So what sort of engagement are you seeing across the marketing channels? How are your campaigns performing? Is it underperforming? Is it overperforming? What about the brand metrics? How is the brand doing? I love using something like a tracker study that tells you kind of the market impression of your brand and of your product. But that's something, when you do a brand study, that the product team rarely has access to, or maybe they see it in like a company-wide presentation on 2 slides. It's actually really important and interesting to them. So I think bringing that into the conversation, talking about site traffic, what's happening on the website, are you seeing more of a lift from unexpected channels, and just making sure that they understand not only what's happening, but that you're looking at all of this stuff, which I think is another really important point. And then around marketing strategy, they often see the launch materials, but they don't necessarily see all that stuff that happens at the higher end of the funnel. So thought leadership, the event strategy, bringing PMs to events with you is often a great experience because then they get to hear from the customers as well. And if you have a partner marketing team, helping them understand how you're leveraging partners in order to hit the product adoption goals. And then finally, processes. So this is something, again, you'll get this, but this is something that I'm actually curious how many of y'all have one of these, but it's basically a launch tier system. So who has one of these that says like, yeah, okay, about 20% again. So it's actually pretty cumbersome to build, but once you build it, it's done. And it's something that you can use to help all of your PMs across the organization. I think especially if you've got like 5 or more PMs, they all want their product to be marketed and they want the full suite of marketing tools. And they want you to throw everything at it. And you have to go out, you have to have something that's a reference point to be able to say, you know what? This launch is a tier 3 launch because it is a iteration on an existing feature. It's really not going to be as important as these other 2 tier 1 launches that we have, and I've got to focus on that. So this is how I'm going to support you with your tier 3 launch, but these are where my other resources are going into. And this is kind of the same conversation that we had about prioritization, and I think this is what a tiered system helps you do. So we also, I think another way that you can apply this is as a product marketing team, and this is obviously if you have, I guess if you're a 1-person team, you could also be doing this. But how many launches do you have that are coming out? So this was for Q4 somewhere I worked, where you had tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, and we knew what products were coming out, what launches across the different product teams within the different tiers and within the different months. And this allowed us to do 2 things. One, it was a great view do for the whole marketing team to understand what was actually coming out of product, and it made the product team look really good, and they were really excited to see this. But it also helped us understand what storylines were out there that we might have otherwise missed if we were only focused on one launch at a time. So out of this, you can say, oh, our storyline for the fourth quarter of the year should be around, bringing startups into our business, because these 3 different features are really focused on helping people build up and scale up from day one. And then finally, we have something that we would hand over to the product team. You'd be working through this together, but you've got your deliverables. It's kind of a finite list. You know what your deliverables can be for the different tiers. And we would ask the PMMs to say which deliverables they would want, and then we would have to work through with the rest of the team. Often it's content, email, our advertising team, our social team. Which of these different deliverables can we actually create for these different launches? So you might be, you have to watch capacity, I guess is what I'm saying. So if you have 4 tier 1 launches and 7 tier 3 launches, you can't do everything in all of these buckets. So how do you kind of make those trade-offs? And then finally, creating your vision. So I think this one feels important to me because it is applicable whether you are a single PMM starting out. And when I was at Etsy, I was the 3rd PMM. We had no vision for the team. It took us several years to build this, but it's also impactful if you are coming in and you're leading a team. So I think, and I know, I say that because I haven't always done this in the way that I think it should be done or can be done to really build understanding and interest in product marketing in the organization. So I think, really it's about hiring the right people. And if you are a single team, or if you're a single one-man show, this is also important for you to think about, right? Because you want to create the vision for what product marketing can and should do and what impact it could have. And part of that is saying, I need these people in order to do this work. And I think often we would say, I know in roles that I've been in, I've said, well, I'll see how the product team is kind of developing and where their roadmap is going, and then I'll say what PMMs I need. But I think looking more broadly, and now that there's places like this where you can ask questions of other PMMs and say, how did you scale your team, or what other functions did you use? Did you use content marketing? Did you have a messaging expert on your team? But yet really thinking about what roles do you need in order to do the best product marketing at your organization. So one is building that structure and the vision for your team. The second is aligning to business priorities. So where's your business going and how are you supporting your business in getting there? Third is demonstrating revenue impact. This is, if it's not revenue, it should be something around how users are adopting your product. But it's great if you can tie it, obviously, to revenue. A lot of this is the third bucket there around revenue really does take coordination across a lot of different teams. It also requires good access to data, but I think that's a great goal if you can get there. And then when you do your hiring, I always like to include a case study on go-to-market strategy or messaging. I think if you don't do that, you often will hire someone who doesn't actually know the practical application of product marketing. It's easy to speak the language, but can you actually show me how you would take one of these products to market? And then finally, I love hiring interns for discrete projects. I don't think that they're great I think it's hard for an intern to come in and do something that isn't fully defined and really a discrete project, but I've seen them come in and do great work, and then I've actually hired a few interns that have worked on my teams in the past. So I think that's another really great thing that we don't always think about, like a product marketing intern, but it's pretty easy to get headcount here. It's not that long of a time. It's not that expensive. And if you can bring someone in who's really excited about the space and you're growing, you might just build yourself a really great pipeline as well for new hires. So 3 last thoughts. 1, I like to think of each PMM as a mini GM or general manager of their business. So you should be owning your business, thinking about your product as its own business, how it's working, what the roadmap looks like, what the marketing looks like, and kind of thinking about how all the pieces come together. And that goes back to the business impact, right? So you can define how your product is impacting the business. The second bucket is bringing new opportunities into your team. So whether that's new information, whether it's new insights, or whether it's customer insights, making sure that you are bringing that to all of the teams that you're touching on a regular basis. I think that builds a lot of goodwill. And then finally, this is, I think, probably one of the themes for the whole conference, but know your customer and know your market. And if you do those things, then I think you kind of hit this like magical moment where everything can come together. You can get out of that crazy, that crazy space where you're trying to get everyone away from you. So that is how I'll end it. I don't know whether it's just me, but that's my LinkedIn. It's so bad. So anyway, find me on LinkedIn. I don't know. Is there like a short link to that I just missed?
There was, but then I think they took it away because there's too many humans on the planet.
Yeah, so I'm 5'6" or whatever that is. So anyway, find me there on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect with all of you. And maybe, do we have time?
We have time for questions. Thank you so much. Round of applause for Brittany. Not sure if we're going to Slido if I'm reading them off, but I'll start by reading them. So the first question is, who owns churn/retention KPI in your company or the companies you've been working in? Is it PMM or customer base management, etc.? Everyone contributes to churn prevention, but who drives actions?
That's a really good question. That's definitely a role or a responsibility that various functions take on. I think at the core where I've worked, and I've been at very product and engineering led organizations, it has been the product team that owns that. Marketing has started to impact that, and I think the stronger product marketers that I've worked with who have a really good grasp on data, they tend to be able to partake in that conversation to a higher degree and to impact that to a greater degree. So I would say typically it's product managers, but marketing's also, it's a metric that marketing's looking at, but when you talk about who feels like they own that, it would be the product managers, but I don't necessarily think that that's the only. I think product marketers can also own that as well. Yeah.
Totes. Next question is, how do you ensure that competitor intelligence is actually adding any value? What key actions can be taken from information that can be gathered?
Yeah. To me, the most important thing is that there's executive buy-in and that they care about it. So one way to do that I've seen is to have a quarterly conversation with key executives, and this typically should be championed by the CMO, who's kind of rallying her peers or his peers to sit down in a room and walk through what's happening in the broader market. That has been how I've seen it be the most effective, but I think it also needs to be, so if it's not at that level, it's not really impacting the strategic goals of the organization, but within the product teams, I think it's, PMMs going to stand-ups and sharing what they're finding out in the market with their peers, cross-functional peers, on a regular basis when there's something important. And then the other best practice that I would say is having a newsletter that goes out once a month that says, here's the market landscape, this is what's evolving, and this is what's changing. And it could be either a competitive intelligence newsletter or a market insights newsletter. Often they're accompanied by reports, like let's say there's a new competitor that's made a bunch of moves in the market recently, then you might want to include a link to that presentation in the email. Okay, next. People across every department are increasingly time poor. How do you get sales, PMs, et cetera, to pay attention to your work? So this is where it comes down to building relationships. I think being in the room for the conversations, and I forget who gave the presentation earlier that showed the product development cycle, where PMMs really play a big role in the beginning, and then the product managers and engineers are off building the product, and then when it comes to launch, the PMMs ramp up again. I think staying in the dialogue, it doesn't mean that you have to be in every single stand-up, but being part of the conversation on a regular basis. And then the last thing I would say is understanding what the teams need from you. So especially when it comes to a sales team, often they'll say, we don't know what's going on, or we get a launch right before it happens, or we find out a product is launching and we didn't really understand or have any input into the marketing strategy. I think it just goes back to having that conversation on a regular basis, and understanding what value you can add. It's almost like thinking about product marketing is about creating value for the customer and understanding the customer's pain points, and you have to do that internally as well. So understanding your sales team's pain points or your PM's pain points, what they can't do that they want to do, and then making sure that you're providing value and helping them get through that. Done.
Fantastic. So there are a couple more questions, but I'm going to try to keep us on track, and it's a great segue for the next talk. So thank you again so much to Brittany Clark.